two passages that we're going to be looking at in particular this morning. First one is 1 Samuel chapter 21, and the next one is Psalm chapter 27. So kind of be ready for that with your Bibles or your electronic devices or whatever it might be. And so we'll just kind of take a peer into there and see what God has to say. We'll tell you a story this morning about a little girl. I love this story. Beautiful little girl. Abby Fair is her name. Her mother is Karen Fair. And when she was 3 years old, which is right about now, she got the habit of getting up every night in the middle of the night and making her way to her mother and dad's bedroom. She'd just get up out of her bed and plot her way down the hallway and get in bed with mom and dad. She was scared at night something would frighten her and she couldn't go back to sleep. 3 years old, they're so cute anyway, right? Unless they're coming trying to get in bed with you, and then they're not so cute when that happens. So that's not going to work. So they take her back and they would put her in her bed. And whenever Karen would do it, the mother, she would tuck her in and she would remind her. She started to remind her because this became something of a habit. She started reminding her and saying, Jesus will take care of you and Jesus will keep you safe and it's going to be okay. You know that? And she'd say, yeah. And she'd sit there until Abby would go back to sleep. But time went on, folks, and it didn't change at all. She just kept on rocking, making her way down there to the bedroom. So one night, Karen's tucking her daughter back in again, and as she's doing that, she says, Abby, have you prayed about this? Did you talk to Jesus about it? Did you ask him to help you feel safe and to help you fall asleep? And Abby looked at her and she said, oh, yes, Mom, I talked to Jesus. She paused a minute and then she said, and Jesus said to come get you. Isn't that a great story? I love that. It's just little old 3-year-old kids are just so cute. I love 3-year-old kids. The only thing greater than 3-year-old kids are 3-year-old grandkids. Y'all hear what I'm saying? that's just something else entirely. That's really beautiful. So anyway, it's a cute story. Kind of how, you get afraid and you're going to run. We develop those coping mechanisms pretty early on to how to deal with fear, right? So that's what we do. It wouldn't be that cute if Abby was 13, would it? And it'd be plumb embarrassing if she were 30. And I'm not even going to tell you about the woman I've been living with for the last 39 years that cannot sleep unless every light in the house is on, blaring in my face. I'm not going to talk about that. Maybe I've mentioned that to you before. I don't understand that kind of fear. But nevertheless, here's the deal. It demonstrates, really, all of our tendencies to let fear rule our lives, to be dominated by fear. Even when you think you're big and tough and you got it all put together, fear has a way of just really sneaking in there. And it has lots of little minions, lots of little negative things that we feel and experience as a result of that, from anxieties to whatever it might be. Fear has a way of, and it's painful. It's painful. And maybe your strategy is not to go get in bed with mom and dad anymore. And hopefully for this crowd, most of us, we're not doing that anymore. But we develop strategies to cope with the pain of it. And some of those strategies, we think they're working for us. We think it's really kind of coming together, but really, no, it's not. And what has happened is that fear has kind of gotten a hold of us, and it keeps us stunted. It keeps us from reaching out and experiencing, really, the humanity and the depth of everything that God has called us to be. Fear has the ability to do that. We're in a little bit of a mini-series here. For a little bit, we're talking about fear. Actually, this mini-series is inside of a larger series, Cultivating the Joy of Generosity. That's our emphasis for 2012, all right? And we've had several little mini-series along through all of that. And the reason that we're looking at that is because we want to embrace. We want to be a people that are captured by a life that is truly life. If you look at the little things that are here on either side of the stage, that's Paul's language for it in 1 Timothy chapter 6, life that is really life. Do you know what the number one enemy is of generosity? It's fear. It's fear. In fact, fear is even more prevalent than that. It's not just the number one enemy of generosity, whether it's being generous financially or it's being generous with our time and faith or whatever it might be. Let me tell you what it is. It's the number one enemy to your own personal growth and development, your emotional growth and your spiritual growth. And your fear stunts us. It gets a hold of us and it kind of traps us in there. And whatever it is. Maybe you're afraid of people, or maybe you're afraid of certain circumstances, or maybe you fear there's a question mark that looms up on the horizon and you're not sure how it's going to really pan out, and so fear gets a hold of you. Maybe it's something that's really, I'm not talking about stuff that's imaginary. Maybe it's a doctor's report that you got back, or maybe it's a message that a mate of 20 years is sending you. Maybe it could be, but fear gets a hold of us. That question mark pops up on the horizon and it begins to control It begins to control us. All right? So this is the second installment in that series. Y'all with me? First installment was about 3 weeks ago when we talked about Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41, where Jesus is with his disciples out on the Sea of Galilee. Actually, it's a little flotilla of boats out there. It's the middle of the night. Storm comes up. Jesus is asleep in the stern of the boat. You remember we talked about that a few weeks ago? Storm comes up. The boat starts to sink in the middle of the night, in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. These guys are terrified. They're terrified, and they wake Jesus up and they say, "Don't you care? I mean, don't you care?" Isn't it amazing? I wonder how many times God has heard that in the history of mankind. That wasn't the first time, probably not going to be the last time. How many times have you said it? God, if you don't start getting a hold of these fearful things in my life, I'm afraid what good are you anyway? Maybe our relationship is just good as done anyhow. If you're not going to, Jesus did not even address that. All he did was he did the unthinkable. He did the unthinkable. He calmed that storm. I wish I could have seen that. I can imagine it in my mind. He calmed the storm. And then it says, verse 41, those guys were terrified. They were afraid to start with. Now they're terrified. They're trying to figure out who is it we're dealing with. Jesus didn't answer any of that. He just asked them 2 questions. And those 2 questions frame this whole business of fear and life. It frames it. First question was, he didn't wait for an answer. He just asked them out there. Some questions sort of beg the answer already, don't they? So he just put out the first question. Why? He said, why? Why are you so afraid? And at first wash, on the surface, it seems like a pretty ready answer, doesn't it? Because we're sinking out here. We're sinking out here. What do you mean, why? Or whatever it may be going on in your life right now. Because people are scary, or because he's leaving me, or because I've got cancer, or whatever it might be. He said, listen to the master. Why are you so afraid? Here's the second question that brings it all into perspective. Do you still have no faith? He said. Now, he's not criticizing anybody for being fearful, because you're not going to avoid fear in this life, are we, Michael? Not going to avoid it at all. It's going to be as part of living as humanity in this fallen world. But you see, we got a choice about this thing. Are we going to be dominated by it? Are our decisions going to be made by it? Are our actions going to be determined by our fears or by our faith? See, when he asks that question, when he says, do you still have no faith? He's talking about the 2 realms that you can live in this world. The opposite of faith is not doubt. In fact, doubt sharpens faith, doesn't it? Those things go together. The opposite of faith is fear. We're either living in fear or we're living by faith. What I mean by that is either faith is determining how we proceed in life, or our fears are. Our fears are stunting us, or we're allowing faith to lead us on. Do y'all see? You see what I'm talking about? There it is. And what Jesus is calling us to in that story, now, listen, don't get away from here without this. What Jesus is calling us to in that story is a broader perspective than right now. He's calling us to a broader perspective that helps us place fear in a context, in a reality with which we can deal with it and actually not let that fear control us. That's what that's all about. That's what that's all about. See what fear does? It messes with your perspective. Y'all with me on this? It messes with your perspective. First of all, it messes with your perspective about God. Fear shrinks God down. Right? And here's the problem that we have. I mean, right now while we're in here and we're worshiping together, it's all great. This is how we overcome, right? Here we go. But you know what? Life is pretty tough. And so I think that a lot of us, at least part of the time, live our lives not absolutely sure that God's really big enough. The God that the Bible describes as being infinitely big, everywhere present, utterly loving. What a beautiful, powerful God he is. We don't feel completely safe with that God. And if you don't, what has happened is fear has shrunk your faith. That's what's happened. And God has gotten smaller. And here's what's going to happen to you tomorrow. Something's going to happen tomorrow that's going to knock your hat in the creek and mess up your day. You find yourself subject to and victimized by anything that comes down the pike. You know why? Because God, really down in your soul, you don't really think God's big enough to handle that. And that means you're going to have to somehow handle that. In prayer, you'll discover, folks whose God has shrunk, you begin to realize that it's shrunk so much that you're not really sure that God's even paying attention. And you're not really sure that God that prayer really works anyway. See, here's what happens to folks like that. You start living a life, you kind of get rutted. Fear has determined your course more than you realize. And so you're living a life where you're praying without faith, you're worshiping without awe, because God's not big enough anyway. There's no awe in worship. You're serving without any joy, suffering without any hope at all, and your life has slipped into a rut. Big, tall walls. No purpose, no meaning. It's just fear. Listen, the message of Scripture against that backdrop, because that's where most folks live. You don't have to. Are you a believer? You don't have to. Against that kind of backdrop, the message of the Bible is we don't serve a tribal God. We serve a big God who is in charge. I may not always know exactly how that works out, but this God is the boss, period. I feel kind of naked up here. Let me hear. Amen? And here's what it means. I don't care how powerless you feel, God's big enough. I don't care what your weakness, God is strong. God is enough. He really is. Fear shrinks God down. Fear messes with your perspective of yourself as well. Shrinks you down. Puts question marks on the horizon. You're okay until you begin to get a little question mark of something about the future or something that's going on. Maybe that report, whatever it might be, you begin to realize, I don't know that I can really, really handle this. And man, that's, your mind just goes cuckoo. It messes with that perspective. Here's the third perspective that fear messes with. It messes with your perception of fear itself. Is fear an obstacle? Is this stops me? I can't do this because of this. Is it a blockade or whatever? Is that what it is? Or is it a challenge? Is it an opportunity? Faith says it's a challenge. It's an opportunity. This is an opportunity for you to grow. You can move through this. You can move through this. So we're going to look at a little case study here, all right? How a guy moves out of fear into faith. Because you're going to get afraid, okay? Okay. Anybody in here? Do you really think that you're not ever going to be afraid ever again? Is it anybody? But how do you choose a course where that fear is not determining what you do or what you decide, but your faith is in spite of that? That's what we're talking about. So let's go. First Chronicles. I tried to say that at first service too, but they're nuts in first service. So here you go. 1 Samuel 21. Now, let me tell you what's going on here. Get your Bible out, your electronic thing, or the paper thing, or whatever you got. 1 Samuel 21, and here's what's happening here. David is in a pickle. David is in a real jam because the king of Israel, a man named Saul, is out to get him. I don't mean he's trying to sabotage his plans or make him look bad. He's trying to kill him, all right? And the reason is because Saul is off his nut. Saul is ringing with jealousy. And by the way, jealousy is just another name for fear. He's scared to death of David. Because after David killed Goliath, that was back in chapter 17, people started singing a song. They started dancing to this song, as a matter of fact. Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his tens of thousands. And Saul said, I didn't going to get it. I'm the king of this whole shebang right here. And so it just worked him over, and the fear got a hold of him. In fact, so badly that he tried to kill David, tried to pin him to a wall with a spear. Wherever David went, he would follow him. Now, David's already been anointed by the prophet as being the next king. But David will not raise his hand against Saul because Saul is God's anointed. Great deal of respect right there. He said, I'm not going to do that. So he's running, and he's running out of places to hide. So here's his thought in 1 Samuel chapter 21. His thought is, I'm going to move in with the Philistines. Philistines and the Israelites were natural enemies, like cats and mice. You know, a mouse doesn't say, I'm going to go live with the cats. But that's what David the mouse did. I'm going to go live with the cats. I'll get my disguise. He disguised himself as a cat, and he moved in to live with his cat because the idea was Saul is not going to follow me into the Philistine stronghold. That'd be crazy for him to do that. I'll just slip in there disguised as a cat, and I'm going to live. But here's the problem. The cats begin to smell a rat. All right? So look at verse 10 of 1 Samuel chapter 21. David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Achish is the guy's name. Abimelech was probably the title, like Pharaoh was for the Egyptian kind of guys. But Achish is this guy's name. Gath is a big area on the coastline there, a Philistine. Sometimes it's called Philistia. Sometimes it's called Gath. Here's the big king. He runs to the king. But the servants of Achish said to the king, "Oh, isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." And it's something how that song in Israel made its way all the way over there to Philistia. Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. Na, 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 na. You want some more? Now, unless you study Hebrew poetry, you not really know. That's what they really did, y'all. You can take that to the bank. That's exactly the way that worked. They would sing that song, and it traveled all across the land. Everybody knew Saul had killed, but David had killed his tens of thousands. And you know, tens of thousands of what had David killed? Philistines. That's right. Well, he killed other people too in the service of God, but he ate Philistines for breakfast. He ate them for lunch. He ate them for supper. He ate them for a midnight snack. And they knew it. This was the mouse that roared against the cats. And so they come to the king and say, "Hey, you realize who's here? This is the one that everybody's singing about. He's killed his tens of thousands." So look, here's what happens. Verse 12 it says David was what? Afraid. Not just afraid, but much afraid. Not just much afraid, but very much afraid. Why? Because here he is, the little mouse, and all of a sudden he's with the cats, and the cats know who he is. So, verse 13, here's his coping strategy. You ready? He pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate, letting saliva run down his beard. Nasty old thing. He made himself out to be like the village nunu. And so Achish says, verse 14, "Look at the man. He's insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen?" This is verse 15. You don't have that. "Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house?" David's ruse worked, at least temporarily. The next verse, which is verse 1 of chapter 22, uses the word escaped. David escaped the Philistines. Now, there's several things I want you to kind of grab a hold of here. David's in a panic. First thing I want you to notice is God doesn't need Philistines to deliver you from your fear. And whatever these strategies are that we've developed even since we were little kids to kind of cope with all of our junk, look here, you think it's getting you something. It's not. You don't need that stuff. All you need is face your fear with God at the helm, okay? That's what you need. That's all you need. And here's kind of a crazy thing about that is you let your eyes kind of filter down through this story, and where it talks about in verse 13 that David pretended to be insane. Let me tell you what, fear drives you, it makes you nuts. It'll make you nuts. You'll start doing things you never would have thought doing. You think that was in David's plan that day he got up and ran to Achish? You think that was his plan? I think I'm going to let spit run all the way down my beard. You think he did that? It makes you do nutty things, absolutely nutty things. And listen, I want you to know something about this story. I don't care how brave you are. I don't care how in tune and all of that stuff you are. There's something in your life that's going to cause you to be afraid sometime. I want you to think about David just for a moment. At this time in his life, he'd already killed a lion with his slingshot. He already killed a bear with the slingshot. He'd already faced a big, tall Philistine giant named Goliath that made all the Israelite soldiers cower in the bushes in total abject fear. He'd gone out there and met him with a slingshot in his hand. And he said to him, face to face, eyeball to eyeball, he said, "You're nothing. You're nothing. You're just like the lion and you're just like the bear. You're here defying God? Do you really think that you can defy God? No way." And he took him down with a slingshot. And yet here he is in this presence of this king, very much afraid. Ooh, it can get you. How do you move through it? Here we are. Y'all ready? Here we are. We're going to wrap this up really quick. Psalm 27. A psalm by David. And he's going to tell us how to move out of fear into faith. Okay? Let your faith begin to rule and dominate rather than your fear. Psalm 27, I love it. I love the way it opens up. In fact, if I was looking at the first 3 verses, I might call that the ideal. Here's where I want to live every moment. Here's what he says in verse 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? You can hear his voice ringing, can't you? Whom shall I fear? And his logic is perfect. If God's the boss and God is and there's nobody bigger than God, is there? If he's your light and if he's your salvation, you really going to be afraid? Whom shall I fear? The Lord is a stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Man, he is singing in the shower right here, isn't he? You sing in the shower? How good do you sound singing in the shower? Y'all, I know you think you sound good. I am good. When I'm singing in the shower, aren't I, Karen? Where'd Karen go? There you are. I'm good in the shower, aren't I? If I could just get a recording of that to the metropolitan people, they'd come beating down my door. They'd fly to Houston. They'd say, here we go. Here we go. But David is kind of singing. It sounds like he's singing in the shower here. Yeah. The Lord is my light. The Lord is my salvation. Of whom shall I fear? The Lord is a stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? And it sounds bold and all of that. But you know what? It's absolutely true, isn't it? You can't beat the logic. And it goes on. He's just building up. When evil men advance against me, verse 2, to devour my flesh, when my enemies and my foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then will I be confident. You wonder, did Bruce Willis write this or did King David? Huh? A Hebrew Bruce Willis. Yippee-o-ka-shay, cowboys. Powerful stuff, isn't it? And here's the thing, if you knew Hebrew poetry, you would see that the rhythm of this psalm fits the sentiment of the words. I mean, it's just a perfect fit. It's just march. No fear in this. It's a victory song of praise and triumph. Though enemies, my foes attack me, they'll stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, though war break out, even then will I be confident. It's the kind of thing that I used to do when I was a little kid and imagine standing up to the bullies. Did y'all ever do that? I used to imagine things that I'm talking about as a little kid, things that I would do to show people how, maybe they push me around. And have y'all ever done that? Y'all looking at me kind of blankly. Does anybody? Okay, yeah, I do that. And I'd think about how I could impress them with my words or with my strength and all this stuff. And they would go, especially a little girl named Colleen Andrews. I thought, man, if she'll just this will impress Colleen. If I just show that, it really sounded really good. And I'll make the enemies run and I'll do like, you know what, the truth be known? I still do that some. And not for Colleen by any stretch. But I mean, just in terms of, I sort of envision how I think that I could really do whatever. Is that what David is doing here? Is this just a bunch of bravado and words? Oh, no. You know what this is? This is the believer's bread and butter. This is your right of inheritance. We're God's kids. We don't have to be dominated by fear. Fears are going to come, but we do not have to make decisions set by fear. Why? Because God is our light and our salvation. God is the stronghold. Somebody say amen. And really, verses 4 through 6, he elaborates on that idea. We're going to skip 4 through 6 right now and come back to it in just a second because there's another message there. I want you to think about the second half of this psalm, verses 7 through 14. Everything changes. Everything changes. The mood changes. The feel changes. The rhythm changes. Everything changes. The joy of faith that you find in the first 6 verses turns into a real deep anxiety. Apparently, God is hiding. Has that ever happened to you? Where is God? What do you do? And I'm going to tell you, that's when fear, what do you do then? Well, here's his advice. He's got 4 guidelines. I'm moving through this kind of quickly. 4 guidelines, y'all, to moving from fear to faith. All right? Number 1, pretty basic, not going to surprise anybody in this room, but you got to pray. You got to pray, baby. And I don't mean just a haphazard like maybe God will hear, maybe God won't. This is a prayer of confidence. In fact, I want you to notice all the verbs in this prayer, they are imperatives. That is, they are commands. It's not so much that David is asking, it is that he is calling God to do what God said he would do. Look at verse 7. Hear my voice when I call. It's an imperative, Hebrew imperative. It's a command. Do it. Hear me when I call, O Lord. Be merciful to me and answer me. He's talking about promises that God has made. And it's as if he's standing here and he's saying, I'm here. I'm here. And I want to tell you, I want you to Answer me like you said you would. Does the Bible not say? We call out to God. Is he going to answer? Yeah. Timetable gets kind of funny, as Ray said a little bit earlier during the communion. That gets a little square. But is he going to? Yes. Answer me. Verse 8, my heart says if you seek his face, your face, Lord, I will seek. Back to the imperatives, verse 9. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my helper. Do not reject me or forsake me. See the confidence? See the confidence in that? He's fearful. Things are going on around him. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. How bad does something have to get for your mother to turn her back on you? Huh? I mean, whoo! Even though that happens, he says, you're going to stay with me. Then back to the imperatives, verse 12. Do not turn me over to the desire of my foes, for false witnesses rise up against me, breathing out violence. Pray those expectant prayers. I'm not talking about, Lord, I need $10,000 really quick. You go get, look here, lay out what you need, but you rely on the promises of God. Maybe it's a $10,000, whatever. I don't know. I don't know how all that he works. But here's what you pray with confidence and with expectation, and even with that sense of, God, I know that you're there, so I'm going to take you at your word. Answer me when I call. Let me see your mercy. Do not forsake me. Stand up there and do battle for me. Pray. Number 2 is verse 11. Learn. Stay in the Word of God. That's what he says. It's still an imperative in his prayer. Teach me your way, O Lord. Lead me in a straight path because of my oppressors. Stay in the Word. Now look, you're thinking, oh my gosh, we all know that. I mean, isn't this kindergarten stuff? Pray and stay in the Word. Yeah, it is. Y'all remember the Jackson 5? It's easy as A, B, C. I'm telling you, 1, 2, 3. I'm getting that look from y'all again. Do you remember the song or not? Y'all know the song? That's what this is. ABCs, 1, 2, 3. Pray and stay in the Word. I can't tell you how many folks that I'll talk with, eaten up with fear, and it becomes obvious fairly soon, they're not in the Word. I'm not talking about what you did a year ago. I mean, right now, in the Word, into prayer, okay? Now it gets a little beefier. Here's number 3, worship. That's really verses 4 through 6. And you let your eyes flow over verses 4 through 6. He's talking about public worship. Huh? One thing I ask of the Lord, this is what I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord. Listen, worship is not about us just coming together getting it right. It's about contact. It's about seeing and sensing and feeling the beauty of God. He says, for that reason, verse 5, in the day of trouble, he'll keep me safe in his dwelling. He'll hide me in the shelter of his tabernacle, set me high on the rock. Then my head will be exalted above all the enemies that surround me. At his tabernacle will I sacrifice with shouts of joy. That's worship language. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Worship. Now let me tell you how it works. In fact, let me just tell you something. I'm going to be a little bit transparent here. Let me tell you when I'm the most vulnerable to fear. 2 times. Really. I mean, not that I can't be afraid any old time. I mean, you get some bad news or whatever, but here it is, basically. Number 1 is when I'm exhausted. I'm spent. I'm tired. I'm emotionally drained. I'm mentally drained. I'm everything drained, and you just don't have another. You been there? And you just don't have a, watch out. And I get focused on that, all right? The second time that I find myself really vulnerable to fear is when I'm focusing on things I don't like about myself. You got anything you don't like about yourself? Wish it was different? Start focusing on that, and I start feeling guilty, and everything starts coming down the pike. Oh, I'm just guilty about my whole life, or whatever you mean. Okay, you get focused on yourself, or sometimes it comes because I'm focused on you. You guys drive me nuts. Did y'all know that? Or maybe it's my circumstances. I don't like where I am. It is not fair where I am. It is not right. And all of that may be true. But I get focused on that, and that's when fear comes in. What's the answer? What's the way out? Worship. You read those verses again. It's worship. Because I'll tell you what worship does. Worship gives you a broader perspective. It lets you back up. We come together on a Sunday morning and we say, Jesus Christ died for me. Jesus Christ has been raised for me. Hope is mine. I will win. Period. I'm going to win. See, it just backs. Now, is it easy to do that? Is it when you're afraid? Is it easy to come to church? Is it easy to worship even privately in your home, driving home from work, or whatever it is? No, it's not. But I'll tell you what, you do it then. Let me tell you what's happening. It is a real test of your commitment. It's a real look into the fiber of who you are in your relationship with worship. Worship does that. Now here's the last one. Here's the last little deal. It's verses 13 and 14. David finishes his prayer. Now he's talking to you and me personally. He's talking to you and me directly. Here's number 4. Here's what you do. When that fear is starting to really knock on your door, you wait. I love what Ray said. You didn't know what I was going to talk about this morning, did you? Oh, maybe you did. Did you sneak in on first service and get a hint for what you needed to say? Yeah. I'm not a patient person. I'm like most of you. I noticed when he said what he said, nobody raised their hand. I'm patient for a couple of minutes. That's about it. Wait for the Lord. Now look at what he says here. See, God's not really just immediately revealing himself to David. He's got problems. Did you notice that in the psalm? He's got problems. He's got some real problems. Big stuff. God is not immediately showing himself, but here's what he says, verse 13. I am still confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. I know it. I feel it. And I know it. Why? Because the Lord is my light and my stronghold. The Lord is my salvation. Nobody stays his hand. Nobody looks at God and says, hey, what are you doing over there? He's the boss. He's the boss. So here's what I know. I'm confident I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. So my advice to you, he says, is this. Wait. Wait for the Lord. Be strong, take heart, and wait. The Hebrew word there, I know you don't care about words, and I don't normally either, but this word's pretty interesting. It's the word kawah, K-A-H-W-A-H. And it's in a verb here. It's one of his imperatives. It's an imperative. He's saying, you wait. You're afraid, you're scared to death. You wait. And you know what that verb means? It means to twist and stretch. Is that what it feels like to wait? Or is that just me? That's what it means to wait. Wait for the Lord, you twist and you stretch. And the noun form of that word, you know how it's translated? Rope. The noun form of kawah is translated as rope or cord, line. And a picture begins to emerge. You make that rope how? By twisting those fibers together. And here's the imagery. Here's what it is. As we twist ourselves around the Lord, as we wait, and that twisting, stretching, we find ourselves living a life where his stuff replaces our stuff. And our weakness and our impotency is replaced by God's strength and God's power. Like in Isaiah chapter 40. Those who wait on the Lord will find their strength, what? Renewed. How about Philippians 4 and verse 13? What? I can do all things through him who strengthens me. You got to wait. And it comes down to, what's going to govern your life? The fears? There are always going to be fears. Is that what's going to make your decisions for you? Is that what's going to determine your act? Or is it going to be your faith in spite of the question marks? I'll tell you one little story here and I'm done. This guy's named Bill Every. He's a retired Episcopalian priest. When he was younger, he writes about getting paid to be a reader for a degree student who was blind. And they developed a kind of relationship. This guy's name was John, Bill and John. Okay, so they developed kind of a relationship. And Bill asks him one day, he said, how did you become blind? What happened? And John said, it was a chemical explosion when I was 13. So Bill said, well, how did you feel? I mean, what went through your mind? How did you actually feel when that happened? And he said, well, I thought my life was over. He said, to be honest with you, I felt helpless. And he said, the real truth is, he said, I was angry. I was filled with hate. He said, I hated God for what he had done. He said, in fact, the first 6 months after that explosion, he said, I never even got out. He said, I just sat up in my room and I sulked. I just sat up in there. And I can understand that, can't you? I just sat up there. I didn't even eat with my parents. They would bring my dinners in and I would eat up there all by myself. I just wasn't going to mess with it. He said, until one day my dad came in. And he said, John, winter's coming. It's been your job to put up the storm windows. Guess what? It's still your job. And I'm going to be at work today, and I want you to get those storm windows up on the house, and they better be up by the time I get home or else. And he turned around, he stomped out of the room, he slammed the door shut. Bill said, what'd you do? He said, well, I got even more angry. I said, who does he think he is? Who does he think I am? Doesn't he realize I'm just a blind kid? He said, I got so mad, I decided I was going to go out there and do it. Because my plan was, I'm going to get hurt in the process, I'm going to fall off the ladder, and then they'll have a kid that's not only blind, but he's paralyzed. And I'll show him. I'll show him. So here he goes, and he feels his way around. He gets out in the garage. He gets those storm windows, because he's up till 13. He could see all this, right? So then he gets over and he gets the tools that he needs, and he gets that all together, and he makes his way over the house, and he's got his ladder, and it takes him just about all day to do it. You know what? He did it. He did it. Bill says, what'd your daddy say? Big smile comes across John's face. He says, you know, I found out sometime later that entire day, Dad was right there. Dad was right there, every step. Faith says that we look beyond the circumstance. God says, I will provide. I am your stronghold. I am your light. I am your salvation. Pray, learn, worship, wait. Can we serve you? Let us know as we stand and sing.
My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When darkness veils his lovely face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand.